All right, let's talk about spreadsheets. Spreadsheets are a super powerful tool to be able to do all sorts of things. And I'll be honest to tell you, if you understand how to work with spreadsheets, you have a job. There's tons of different fields that work with spreadsheets: clerical work, engineering work, financial work, like you name it. And science is not alone in that. So we're going to learn a little bit about spreadsheets and how to work with them. And right now we're going to focus on how do we do graphs and charts with them for this first lab, which is analyzing kind of clip D and putting together a graph, or in this case, a chart of kind of that information. And we'll use this powerful tool, which is a spreadsheet, to be able to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Go to Sheets here. And I'm going to start up with our first kind of blank sheet. And this is what it looks like when you first get into it. It might be a little bit small, so let me go ahead and make it a little bit bigger so you can see some things. Hopefully that's big enough for you to see what's being written. In a spreadsheet situation, you have all these kind of cells down here, which is why we call them Excel for Microsoft, or in this case now Sheets, because there's different sheets you can work with. Down at the bottom, you can do lots of different sheets. But in this case, all of the columns, which are these vertical things, are labeled with the letters A through, well, and beyond. And then the rows are labeled with numbers, starting with 1 and working their way down. So any given cell, like this would be D7, and we can reference that at some other point. We can put all sorts of different information in these cells as we go. So if you've worked with spreadsheets before, this may feel a little bit slow, but hopefully this is good for you when you're thinking about how to graph things. So I'm going to put in some specific data here to be able to help me out. We were looking at clip D, and clip D is this car that's driving along kind of from the left-hand side of the screen to the right-hand side of the screen, not really kind of moving all that fast and proceeding forwards, at a certain distance per frame that it got set. The graph that we're looking at doing is a per time graph. So it's kind of position, where is the car at a particular time. And so in this spreadsheet, I'm going to put in some positions and times. I'm going to start out by putting in some times in this column. And so I'm going to start by labeling the column time, and I'm going to put in some parentheses and put in the units afterwards. This is the only place that I want to put in that unit. I don't want to put units anywhere else down in the column here, because spreadsheets don't play nice with both numbers and units in the exact same place. We just want numbers there, or just labels as things go. Up the top on the next one, I'm going to go ahead and put in position. I can type. I think so. And I'm going to put that in as centimeters, because that seemed like an obvious number based on the ruler that was behind as the car drove across. And I'm going to put in some data here. Now, the data I'm going to put in is not real data. So if you try and copy this and then turn it in something, it's not going to go so well. But I'm going to go ahead and put in some data here to help us to understand things. So I asked you to choose 5 consecutive frames, 5 frames that are one right after the other, somewhere in the middle of the actual kind of car driving across. And so I'm going to go ahead and put in some times associated with that, assuming that let's go ahead and choose kind of those times as being kind of 0 time up through kind of 5 times later, 5 frames later. Well, how much time passes for every frame? Well, let's start off with 0 at the beginning. So at 0 seconds, that's the beginning of our kind of frames. And the next amount of time that's passed is to ask, well, how much time passes for each frame? And YouTube shows at 30 frames every second, which means that every single frame that's being shown to the screen is only on screen for 1/30th of a second. So I'm going to use that to be able to put this into the numbers here. Now, 1/30th, how do you represent that? You could put it in as a decimal, or you can put it in as a fraction if you don't know. Turns out that spreadsheets can be used to do math really easily. but you do have to like give kind of the magic code symbol to show, hey, Sheets, I want to do some math, or I want to do a function to do something else. And that magic symbol is this equal sign. And when you type an equal sign in here, whatever that follows is a function of something that's on the board. I can add up different cells. I can find averages of things. I can do statistical variations, whatever I want to do. But in this particular case, I just want to do a math problem so that I can do 1/30, or 1 divided by 30. So that is 1/30th of a second. And if I hit enter, now I've got a new number here. It throws it in decimal form, but it did some math for me. And this is 1 divided by 30. I can see it up here at the top. And this number is 0, and I can see it at the top. So I've got 0, 1/30th. And then I can keep going this way. I can do to 2/30ths. So equal 2, comma, or /30. And now it shows up the 2/30ths. And we can keep going that way around. I can also say, hey, I want each one of these to add another 30th, 1/30th to each of the pictures as we go. So I could reference the cell in front of me and then add 1/30th onto it. And I could do it like this. I could say equals, and I'm going to point to the cell above it, this one, which is A4. And then I'm going to add on to that. Oops. Again. Many things happening. I could turn on to that and I could say, I want to add to that now 1/30th more. So this is the cell in front of it plus 1/30th. And I could hit enter. And now I'm up to the next piece. So this is this plus 1/30th. And I can keep going that same route if I wanted to by doing what's called a fill down. And I can grab this little tiny box in the corner. If I change my pointer and I click and I drag down, what happens here is that if I let go, I'm going to go ahead and now everything just adds 1/30th to the next one. So this was a 30th. This is 2/30ths, 3/30ths, which is kind of in that 0.1 category. And then 4/30ths, 5/30ths, 6/30ths, and so on. But I really only need to have 5 frames. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 frames is all I need. So everything else, I can get rid of that. So here's my numbers. I could make them look better by formatting them and saying, hey, I want these to be numbers, maybe here, and then maybe it looks a little bit more cleaned up, rounded to things. So this is certain amounts of time. My positions, I'm going to go and put in some, again, fake data. I'm not looking at my movie right at the moment, so I'm just going to drop in some possible positions. And I'm going to start out, and let's say the position starts out at 18 centimeters, somewhere near the center of the frame, 18 centimeters. And then maybe let's say it moves an entire centimeter, and now it's at 19 centimeters. And then maybe it's at 20 centimeters. Now, I don't know if they really moves a whole centimeter each time for each frame, but I'm just going to pick some numbers that are pretty easy to work with. So 21 and 22. So now I've got time data and position data that I've put in here, and it gives you a little bit of an insight of what these numbers might look like. These are not correct numbers, though. The next bit is that I want to create a graph out of this, or a chart as the whole thing. And so here's how I'm going to do that. It's pretty easy. And when I do this, it's going to fill in a ton of information for me. So watch closely. I'm going to bring my pointer up here to time. I'm going to click and hold, and I'm going to drag down and over. So now I have highlighted all of the data that I've put in there, but I started with time. That's why this box has kind of a darker blue outline on it. And I've now highlighted everything, starting from the top, dragging down. Now I'm going to come up here to the word insert, and I'm going to go all the way down here to the word chart. So I highlighted, I'm going to insert chart, and it's going to bring up a chart, and it's going to drop it right in here right away. And there's a ton of information that's already on this chart that I don't have to do anything from. Now, I've been working with Sheets already, which means that my graph might look a little different than your graph when it drops in. You actually might have a graph that's a bar graph instead. It might look something more like this. The chart type is what allows you to make your decisions. You might say, well, line graph is what I want, or maybe I want a pie graph out of this whole thing. But to be honest, what is the one that we really want when we're looking at this? Well, if I go all the way down to the bottom, or pretty close to the bottom, I get one that is called scatter. And that's the one I want today. The line graph doesn't do it. If you select line graph, I'm afraid we're not going to make things work the way we want to, at least not easily. On the flip side of things, scatter makes it work just fine. So here's my scatter plot. And you'll notice that because I put time first here and position second, it put time down here on the x-axis, and it put position on the y-axis, and it already put in my label for my units, and all that stuff is already done. It also put a title at the top without me having to worry about it. So lots of the stuff was done for me by just putting in the data. Now you might say, hey, I'm already done. But there's a couple things I want to change. First, I want to make sure that our data is using this space appropriately. And there's a ton of this graph that doesn't really have anything going on in it. And all this data is up here at the top, even though we start at 0, 0. So I'm actually going to drop my graph down a little bit so we don't start at 0. And I'm also going to put in a best fit line, a line that goes through all of the data. Now, best fit lines, if you're doing this on paper, you'd probably grab a ruler, slap your ruler down across the dots, and draw a straight line somewhere in the middle of them. Turns out that, well, we call that a best fit line. It's not really a true best fit line. There's a whole bunch of mathematics behind best fit lines to be able to figure out what you need. And it turns out that the computer program, this kind of spreadsheet, can do that all for you without you having to worry about it, which is nice. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and leave all of these settings as they are, and I'm going to come over here to the word customize, and I have a whole bunch of choices. I'm going to walk through some of these right now. The first one is chart style, which lets you choose kind of fonts and colors and backgrounds and the rest. Big word of warning here, please do not create a graph that has a big black background on it and pink dots. It makes it very hard to read and it stands out strangely. Keep it simple, keep it clean, and it will be helpful for me as a reader or anybody else that might come into it. Charts and axis titles, we actually had many of these things already filled in for us because we had highlighted the data on the side. Right now, the chart title is here, and I can change that chart title if I want to, or I could change things like our horizontal axis, which is labeled as time, or our vertical axis, which is labeled as position, and so on. So those are things that have filled in for us, but we could change them if we wanted to. I'm going to go back to series in just a moment, and I'm going to leave out legend for now and go down to horizontal axis and vertical axis. The horizontal axis looks pretty good to me right now. It starts at 0, and our data starts at 0, and it goes over here all the way to this, 5/30 approximately. So that's pretty good. But the vertical data is the one where there's this big gap. So I'm going to go to the vertical axis, go down a little bit, and it says, hey, we can put in a minimum value if we want to. And the minimum value I'm going to use is something that kind of allows us to fit things on here. This data starts at 18, so I could go ahead and start this data at 18 if I wanted to. And then you'll notice that the graph starts from 18 and goes all the way up to 22. I'm now using the space a lot more appropriately. It doesn't have that big kind of blank space down the bottom. The next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and go back to this word series. Series allows me to change these dots here, and I can change the color of them, I can change the look of them, how big they are, but I can also put on this great thing here called a trend line, and that's really what I want to do next. This is, again, the thing that is hard to do by hand, but ridiculously easy on this computer program, which is great. So I'm going to click trend line, and it's immediately just going to draw it for me. Now, I could choose other options of things that are non-linear. Linear means right in a straight line. Technically, all lines are straight, but that's a different story. I could choose a different curve. I could choose an exponential curve or a polynomial curve or a logarithmic curve. But right now, my data looks pretty straight line because, to be honest, I chose things that are straight lines. So I'm going to leave it as, if I can, I want to, where did I go? Oh, I went down too far. I don't want data labels. I want trend lines, and I want linear. There you go. I'm all set. I can change all sorts of other stuff about it, but the only other thing that I want to add here is that I want to add a label. And I'm going to add that label of an equation because I want to see what that actual graph line is. And notice that it drops it right up here at the top, and it drops it here in slope intercept form. So 30 is your slope, and the intercept is 18, being the y-intercept. So it drops in a graph already where you didn't have to calculate that at all. So that's nice. The last piece to this puzzle, if we want to do anything with it, is that we can add in some more grid lines and ticks. Now, I'm pretty happy with what I'm seeing here, but if I wanted to, I could put in some minor grid lines here to make that happen. This is vertical, and I could say, hey, I'd like to have an extra grid line in here because I would like to be able to see where that is. Or I can go back down here and go to the horizontal, and I could put in a kind of a minor grid line as well. And so now I have a graph that has a few more grid lines. And that's fine. You could do that if you would like to increase kind of the readability of the chart as a whole. So what do we do with this in the end? Because I'm pretty happy with all the pieces. I can actually take this chart, this graph, and I can highlight it by just clicking on it, going up to Edit, Copy, and now it's on my clipboard, and then I can go into my Google Classroom and I can drop it right in. I can paste it right into that Google Doc that I've been working on. So I hope this helps out a little bit. It can be a little bit tricky to make sure you have all the things turned on and off, and sometimes things get off. Feel free to watch this and try and make sense of it. And if you get stuck, come in and ask me questions. I've done a lot with spreadsheets over the years, and I can definitely help you get out of a jam if you've got it. So, all right, everybody. Thanks for watching, and hopefully this was helpful. All right, take care. Bye.